Spokane Valley could become a sanctuary city of a different
Councilman
kind.
Caleb Collier says that this
I'm proposing that the city of Spokane Valley issue a proclamation stating that our city is a Second Amendment sanctuary city.
Welcome to the fire.
Today on Church and State, the Australian Patriot Topher. Hello, Christian Patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we drive morality and religion over tolerance and apathy. And I'm your host, Caleb Collier, once again, your favorite far-right shock jock, and the show that talks about politics and religion. Jesus Christ is our referee, so it's always nice and clean. Real quick, point you to the website, churchandstate.media. Do a few things here. Number one, fill out this form for us, all right? It's important. We're sending you the newsletter. We're sending you the shows. We're bypassing censorship, and I personally call you, which is such a huge benefit. People love talking to me. I'm so entertaining and so friendly. That's what my mom says anyway. So, test me. See if I am friendly. Give me a call. All right. Also, check out the most recent episodes, continuing to cover hard-hitting topics and just bringing amazing guests to you and covering, areas that people are afraid to. I mean, that's one thing I will say. Like, I toot my own horn as kind of a joke on the show a lot, but honestly, I'm not afraid of any subject. I'll bring on anybody. I'll talk to anyone, cover any story. That's what you can expect here. And always through that Christian lens, obviously, but yeah, I'm not afraid of it. So if you like the show, share them. Also, check out and peruse through the featured guests. We bring in incredible people over the years. We've had amazing people join us. And with all of those, you just click on the name. It goes right to the episode. So please do so. Also, check out all these great affiliates, all these great companies that help support us, that like what we do here. And with all of them, you use that promo code or coupon code Church and State. Many of those, it brings a discount. All of them, though, we get a commission from. So please do some shopping for us, and hit the donate button for us. Keep us alive on NRBTV, Proper Broadcasting Network, newscasters, Faith and Freedom Television. I mean, there's a lot we're a part of. National syndication beginning in mid-August through AM/FM radio. You know that's a lot. You know we're doing, we're putting in the work, right? And as the Bible says, a worker is worth his wage. And so you're watching this show. I put it out there for free. There's no firewalls. There's nothing. You have to pay extra for, bonus content. I'm not doing any of that. I'm sending it out to you because I believe this information is important and benefits the people. So if you like it, pony up a little bit. And I say that humbly, but please, it does require money to do what we're doing. And so if you like it, whatever amount helps us get there. Lastly, if you want to get a hold of us, churchandstate1776 at proton.me. With that, let's go ahead and get into our interview with Topher. He's an Australian. He's a patriot. He paid the penalty for his patriotism and for his love of liberty in Australia, which during COVID became probably one of the most tyrannical nations in the entire world. It was rather shocking to see. But Topher's one of the good guys, so I hope you enjoy this interview.
Hey, this is Caleb Collier with Church and State. I'm over at Freedom Fest, and I've got a great guest right here, Topher. Find you at the Topher Project, correct?
Topher Project or just Topher Field. Topherfield.com and Topher Field on all the socials.
Okay, excellent. Now, you have, you are kind of a thorn inside of Australia, but really big government as a whole, and you really kind of, the catalyst for you was the extreme lockdowns that we saw during COVID. In Australia was like, hold my beer, like we're going to go full on tyrant.
Yeah, I was already on a journey towards libertarianism, Christian libertarianism before then. But that was really the first time in my life I had put the rubber to the road. Because if I didn't, I was going to become a hypocrite. And, everyone hopes that they're the courageous guy. Everyone hopes that when the time comes, they'll be the one. We have to be humble enough to admit that until we get tested, we don't know. And so I developed certain beliefs about what ought to be done in such a hypothetical scenario, and then all of a sudden the scenario was no longer hypothetical. And I had to speak up. I had to do something, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. But the context there is I've been a political commentator since 2009. I started when YouTube was only 2 years old. I was independent from the very beginning, and I just did it as a hobby. It's this thing that I did on the side. And I was almost sort of perversely proud, like this false humility kind of thing, of not caring about how many people watched. I wasn't trying to grow an audience. That's kind of vulgar, these people who are trying to get more followers, and no, I'm not like them. And then COVID hit, and I began to speak out and say, guys, these lockdowns are a terrible idea. They are going to do more harm than good. My position, for those that are wondering, is let's protect those who are genuinely vulnerable. And by March of 2020, we knew who they were. We had the data out of Italy, out of Sweden, out of Israel, out of other places, age stratified, divided up by comorbidities. We understood who was genuinely at risk. And for the rest of us, it really wasn't that big a deal, and it should have been treated as such. So protect the vulnerable, let everyone else go free, and you'll very quickly develop your community. That was my position. And I began to speak out and to say that, and I copped all kinds of blowback. You want grandma to die, you don't care about people, you're being selfish, all the rest of it. And then someone, because I was the only public figure at the time who was actually speaking out, I wasn't the only person, but I was the only person who had a public profile. I'd been a commentator for 10 years by then. I got invited to speak at the very first anti-lockdown protest. Now, you got to understand, Australia, as much as you know that Australia went crazy, you don't know how crazy. And I can say that with authority because every time someone watches my documentary, even people who were in Australia, unless they were out there with us, if they stayed behind their closed doors and obeyed the rules, they watch the documentary and they come back to me and go, Topher, I'm so sorry. I had no idea actually how bad it got out there. So we were in a situation where the government had decided to declare a state of emergency, which gives the state premier of Victoria. So obviously we're a country, we have a prime minister. The prime minister mostly did border lockdowns. It was the state of Victoria under the premier Daniel Andrews that really went full on tyrannical. And you can think of Victoria as the California of Australia, kind of a one-party state, progressive left, and worships government. The government is at the centre of our society, and that's broadly true in most of Western culture, but it's certainly true in Victoria. And so Daniel Andrews, the Premier, was cast as this central figure in the battle of a lifetime against the virus of a lifetime. And boy, he loved it. He was the central, he was the hero now. And we watched as people went mad. They divided into two camps, basically. And you'd be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this sort of triangular thing. At the bottom is bare survival. Oxygen, food, water, shelter. At the top is living your best life. He calls it self-actualization, where you've got purpose and meaning and belonging, and you just can't wait to get up every day and get on with another wonderful day. The reality of life is most of us are kind of in a blob in the middle there somewhere. At any given moment in time, there's only a handful of us that are desperate for survival, and there's regrettably only a handful that are really living their best life. Most of us are a blob in the middle. Now, when you bring along lockdowns, and for context, lockdowns in Australia meant every private business that was not deemed to be essential was closed. We were in our homes for 23 hours a day. If we left our homes for that 1 hour per day, it had to be for a government-approved legitimate reason. If you went more than 5 kilometres, which is about 3.5 miles from your home, they would arrest you unless you had paperwork from the government to prove that you were allowed to. And they would use number plate scanners on your car, and if your home address came up as too far away, they'd pull you over. The playgrounds were closed, everything, schools were closed, all of that. They put up a thing called the Ring of Steel, which was military checkpoints on all the arterial roads into and out of Melbourne. So 4.5 million people basically in an outdoor prison. And you had to, without any irony at all, they were coming forward and saying, papers, please, looking through your window. And to give you some idea of just how heartless this actually was, the implementation was, when elderly people went for their 1 hour of yard time for their walk, which was a permissible reason to leave home, was for exercise. If they stopped and sat on a park bench, they got arrested. Because you're no longer exercising. We don't do that exercising. People got arrested for taking their bins out after an 8 p.m. curfew. We didn't have a curfew for long. There was a period there where we had one. And people got arrested because they took their bins to the curb after 8 p.m. Who were they a danger to? Everybody else is inside. And so there was no rationality. There was no sense to it at all. And the other thing that the government did was they shut down our parliament so that they weren't subject to parliamentary question times or any sort of scrutiny or oversight. And they made protest illegal. Now, I'm not a protester from way back. I was raised as a pastor's kid, good conservative family, goody two-shoes to a fault. I look back and I cringe at just what a suck-up I really was. And, I served in the military, never deployed. I'm not trying to claim anything out of that, but I passed all the security checks and the psychological checks, and I did the good conservative thing and joined the army. And if I'd been deployed, I would have gone. Thankfully, I never was. But I ticked all those boxes all the way through. And then COVID came along. And I knew in the depths of my soul that what the government was doing was wrong. Churches were being shut down. And to their shame, most churches agreed. Most churches didn't just obey, they supported it. And we'll get to that later, I'm sure. But I knew that my conscience demanded of me that I speak out. And then I was invited to speak at a protest. Now, that's different to speaking out online, because the protests were illegal. This was a decision. And I knew if I go and do this, my life will never be the same. I have no idea what it will look like. I don't know how dramatic the change will be yet, but it will never be the same. And there was an enormous amount of fear in the media, an enormous amount of fear in a lot of people's hearts and minds. And to go against that in a moment of panic is a risky thing to do. And that's why most other public figures never spoke out. They weren't willing to pay the price, to lose the following, to get the hate, the sanction, possibly be arrested. So I said yes to speaking at this protest, and we couldn't publicize it and promote it early, because if we did, we'd all get arrested before the day even came. So on the morning of the protest, not long before I had to leave home, it was 1 hour's drive away from my home, I posted online and said, there's a protest, it's going to be in this location, I'm going to be speaking. And I got in the car and I drove, and let me tell you, on the inside, it was like a washing machine. I was churning. The stakes weren't even that high yet. I reflect on it now because I now know how bad it got. And I'm like, how ridiculous to be worried about that one, given that there were rubber bullets flying and armored cars in the streets, and you had to dodge horses being charged through, like, given that where we got to, people are being hospitalized in all kinds of horrific ways. The very first person to get shot with a rubber bullet is a friend of mine, Matt Lawson. He lost 4 internal organs because of the blunt force trauma that just liquefies the cells, and then they start to die. And, like, we got to that point. So I look back at how nervous I was about that first one, and I kind of have to laugh at myself a little bit. But at the time, that was a really big decision. And I was right in the sense that my life was never going to be the same. So I churned and I drove and I parked. And I could see the park where we were going to have this outdoor gathering, this little rally, not even a protest. When we say protest in Australia, we don't mean burning things down and smashing windows. We mean like a rally. That's what we mean. But the police were already there. They'd seen my Facebook posts and whatever else that anyone else had put up about it. And there was hardly anyone else there, and there were the police, and there was no conflict yet, but the police were clearly, they're on their radios, and they're clearly expecting more units to come. There were 6 of them already, and they were expecting more. And I sat there, parked across the road. I hadn't been identified yet. And most of me was screaming, delete the Facebook post, turn around and drive home. Hug your wife. I had a son. We were expecting our second child at the time. And like, don't do this again. Like just keep the squeaky clean. But I knew that if I did that, then I would have proved to myself that I wasn't the person that stepped up. And I don't want to have to live with that for the rest of my life. So what I actually did was I pulled out my phone and I started a live stream to Facebook. And because everyone was locked down, no one had anything better to do, and I was known as a public figure, so I started live streaming, and bang, hundreds of people, and 1,000 people, or more, all jump on very quickly. And so what I did was I told them, okay, I'm parked across the road from the protest. I'm going to be getting out of the car shortly, blah, 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 telling them what's going on. Actually, I was stalling until that number hit 1,000. And once there were 1,000 people watching, internally, I was like, well, now, if it turns out, if I'm about to find out that I'm a coward, and that was my big fear, am I about to discover that I'm actually a coward? Then the whole world's going to know that I'm a coward. And I kind of bullied myself into actually getting out of the car, walking across the street, walking into that protest. And by the time I got home, so the police actually, they didn't know what to do. This had never happened before. We were in totally uncharted territory. This level of human rights violation in Victoria, where protesting is illegal, had never happened before. So what they actually did was they said to us, listen, we're going to come back at 11 o'clock and we're going to arrest anyone that's still here. And we looked at our watches and went, that's an hour away. So what I just heard was we've got till 10:55. That's what I heard. And so that's what we did. And I gave a speech that day, and a couple of others did as well. There's about 70 people showed up. And then I drove home and I looked in that mirror so many times. I can't even tell you. Then I got home and I jumped on my Facebook page and discovered that live stream had been viewed over 100,000 times. I had a barrage of hate in my inbox, in my emails. People found companies that I was associated with, that I'd done work with, and started leaving 1-star reviews and review bombing them to try and destroy their reputation. This company works with Nazis. Where did that even come from? That accusation. Yeah, so the hate campaign really came on strong. And then the love followed in the days that followed. It was this really interesting experience. And I had people saying to me, I followed you for 10 years because I thought you were X, and I thought you did your research and you understood and you're this and you're that. Now I know you're just an attention-seeking whatever. I'm like, well, hang on. What if you were right the first time and I'm still doing the research and I'm still thinking things through and I'm still taking what I do very, very seriously? So that was the beginning. And because that went so viral, I was sort of catapulted from, minor public figure, obscure, sort of my own niche kind of thing, really into the public consciousness, and things really went crazy after that.
I would imagine, and we'll get into that. I interviewed a young lady from Australia that was also at the forefront of the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah. What was her name?
I cannot recall her name for the life of me. Right
So
now.
there were a lot of amazing people. Let me try Monica Smith.
Yeah,
Did she go to prison for a while?
Yes,
So that would be Monica Smith. She did, I believe it was 21 days in solitary confinement.
that's the one. Yes.
She's amazing. She's a friend of mine. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So I did hear a little bit. I haven't read or seen your documentary yet, but I do know some of what's going on. But even with that, I mean, some of the things you're telling me are just shocking and horrifying. And we thought we had it bad in the United States.
And to be fair, if you were in the wrong place, you did. What I don't want to do is be seen to be minimizing other people's experiences, because other people's experiences of lockdowns were also very, very bad for them in their own ways. We saw footage coming out of California where they were using paintball guns to kind of, just people on their balcony, saying, that's a horrific thing to have happening in your neighborhood. And the fact that it was worse somewhere else doesn't diminish that for those people. But what I think I'd love for people to understand is, take what happened here, take the worst of what happened here, make it statewide, 4.5 million people in the city of Melbourne, 6.5 million in the state of Victoria, and make it go on for over 570 days. Now, it wasn't exactly the same all the way through. It varied, and there were moments actually where it really did ease up, but never for long. And you always lived with the tension and the knowledge. Literally, the Premier could come on the television at any moment in time, and he did. I'll give you one example. Valentine's Day, or February 14th, is what it is in Australia. I don't know if it's the same here. The day before Valentine's Day, there were a handful of cases. He would shut the state down for one case of coronavirus anywhere in the state. And there were a couple of cases that popped up, and he shut down with basically zero notice. 7 p.m. tonight, we're going into lockdowns again. So every business that had put out Valentine's Day events and taken bookings and taken prepayments, all of the florists, absolutely everybody that had said, finally we get a moment. We have a moment to breathe. We can actually make some money. We can serve some coffees. We can serve some meals. We can cut some flowers. All of a sudden, all of that went to waste. And so what was meant to be a beautiful moment of relief actually became the final straw for a lot of businesses. So even in the moments where we came out of lockdown, the tension was never for all.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that you had a lot of hatred, and
Sure.
I've experienced hatred myself, and also for COVID lockdowns and protests that I organized. But I would imagine you also got some hate from Christians. Christians who would say things like, "You need to submit to government because that's what is told to us in Romans 13."
I'm just dealing with a family. So my family is loving with me. It looks like I'm being rude, but my family are depending on me for some things, and there's been a miscommunication.
No problem whatsoever. Yeah, so I can press on that a little bit more while you answer that text message. But yeah, I did see from my own experiences that Christians will come after you if you dare to question or push back against government whatsoever.
Yeah, and this was very, very evident. My own pastor of my church that I've been going to for a number of years by then, I had a very good relationship with him and his wife and the team. My own pastor refused to continue worshiping, so he obeyed the lockdowns. Now, just as a matter of principle, and his argument was our lives are at stake. Just as a matter of principle, let's say it was the Black Death. Let's say genuinely 1/3 to 1/2 of everyone's going to die because of this thing. Isn't that all the more reason to throw the church doors open?
That's what the church did during the Black Plague.
And put the speakers on the steps and crank the stereo to 11 and say, "Come in, all ye who are sinful, for the kingdom of heaven might be closer than you think. Your judgment day might be closer than you think." That's what someone who believes they have the keys to salvation does when mortal life is threatened.
Absolutely.
We get busy about eternal life. If you take a moment like that, where fear was everywhere and people were looking for hope and every back was turned. Mental health counsellors were booked out for months and you had to meet them online. You couldn't talk to your MPs, you couldn't talk to your family, you couldn't visit each other, you couldn't see any of your normal people. All your sports are locked down, all your bars and clubs and pubs are locked down. You can't do any of the things that might normally otherwise have helped you to cope with a circumstance like this. And you're looking for somebody who has some kind of hope. Where is it different? And you look at the church and the door is locked and there's a sign that says, "Go talk to Centrelink, go talk to the government, get a welfare check if you need something." What are we saying in that one? I think it is genuinely one of the most shameful chapters. God gave us an opportunity to show the world that we are different because we have hope. And what we said to them was, we're no different. We don't have any hope. You need to go and seek your salvation from the government. And what a travesty. Now, I will say the silver lining is this. God's given us that as an opportunity now for us to learn from. And we know that some people stood tall. And they should be grateful to God that they had the insight and the wisdom and the theology to stand tall during that time. There are some people that showed themselves to be complete charlatans, and now we know who they are. There were others who genuinely thought they were doing the right thing, but they got it wrong, and they have a chance to learn from that, to humble themselves and to say, okay, I now understand this in a way that I didn't before, and I'll do it different and do it better. My own pastor, I challenged him. I said, this is exactly the moment when we need to be open, we need to be worshiping, we need to be live streaming, we need to be showing that there is light, there is hope, we need to be a city on the hill. And he said to me, Topher, I can't do what you want me to do, because if I do that, then the government will pull the funding from the soccer academy that we run for migrants. I said, I thought I'd read my entire Bible, but obviously I haven't, because I didn't get to that verse that said, go ye into all the world and run soccer academies for migrants. I didn't. That verse must have slipped me.
I missed that too.
Yeah. And so needless to say, it was very evident from then that we weren't going to get along really well. And so that was the attitude of a lot of the church. And I think about that principle that you cannot serve God and money. And what we saw the church do, so many churches, because they've got childcare centers or they've got, government grants for these different things, they clung to the money and they despised God. And that is something which, if you're a pastor and you're an elder and your church did that, can I encourage you to not be in the intransigent category that is irredeemably corrupted and idolatrous and worshipful of government? Can you instead be in the humble category that says, we made some mistakes and we got some things wrong, but we're going to go back to God, we're going to go back to our scripture, and we're going to get ourselves right with God so that the next time we get tested, we pass.
I mean, amen to that. And you ultimately ended up writing 2 books on this very subject.
Yeah.
I love that. You and I were talking off camera. And, the Bible is just filled with story after story after story. All these heroes of the Bible, people that we imagine we'd be like.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of that testing of being a coward or not. But all of them, they disobeyed the civil authorities.
And that's why they're heroes of the faith. That's literally why. So it's Old Testament, it's New Testament, it's early church. You can go right through, but I want to touch on a couple of specific things. So this second book of mine was born out of my first book. So after all the madness, after 18 months of madness and people being beaten up and hospitalized, I was arrested and I spent years fighting criminal charges before they dropped them. And life went to, what. After 18 months, we finally made the Victoria Police back down. They issued a public letter to the government and to the media on the same day saying, we're not doing it anymore. We're not enforcing the lockdowns anymore. We're not stopping protests anymore. That we're done. We're out. And that was because we had kept coming back, even as they escalated the violence. They'd put more of us in the hospital. We'd come back and do another protest. They'd put more of us in the hospital. They'd use heavier weapons. They'd use all kinds of things. Thankfully, no one was killed, but we were at the point where I think they realized they were going to have to kill somebody in order to get us to stop. Sure. And even then, there was no guarantee that we would have. And they realized at that moment, we can't do that. So they finally backed down. The lockdowns ended by default. The government didn't declare the lockdowns over. They ended by default. And so I then directed a feature-length documentary called Battleground Melbourne. You can watch it for free. It's on my website, topherfield.com. Just click on the documentary tab. You can watch it there. And it won 14 film awards, did very, very well, including an award from the Anthem Film Festival here at Freedom Fest, which is where we are now. And one of the things I realized as I directed that documentary and obviously spoke to a lot of people was we're very good at recognizing the righteousness of civil disobedience when it happened a few decades ago. 40 years ago, 60 years ago, we go, oh, yeah, absolutely. But then when it happens in front of our face, there's this reflexive, no, that can't be what you have to do. But you're told, no, you're being irresponsible, you're being whatever. You're creating trouble. Why are you causing trouble? And so I wrote my first book, which is titled Good People Break Bad Laws. And it's a defense of civil disobedience in the modern context, but it also explores some of the reasons why it looks wrong in real time. And I'll give you one example that may upset a few of your viewers, because I'm going to use a little bit of language.
I'm pretty
controversial.
Australian. That's okay.
So one of the chapters in my book is titled In Defense of Arsenals. By definition, the person who speaks up first is an outlier. they're a weirdo.
Yeah.
Everyone else is sitting there going, and they're going, that person's a weirdo. And if they're a weirdo in that thing, they've probably been a weirdo all their life. They are probably temperamentally predisposed towards being controversial, saying the thing that you're not supposed to say, holding an opinion that you're not supposed to hold. That probably means that they've got a history, they've got a backstory there of being a bit ignorant. And what happens is when that person speaks up on something that's right, the media, the politicians, their opponents, whomever, can dredge up all of that history. Go, oh, you don't want to be associated with this guy, right? And so I actually, this is one of the things that I cover in my book. It's like, I'm sorry, when you're in this situation, if you think you're in a fight, but you're picky about who your allies are, then you're not really in a fight yet. You don't know what it means to be in a fight.
Well said.
Okay? It's when you are desperate for another gun, no matter who is holding it, if they're pointing it in the right direction, then welcome, brother, get alongside.
And not to mention, Topher, when you become an enemy of the state, they're going to dig up everything they can about you and make up stuff as well. But I don't know about you, but I know that I'm a wretched human being saved by Christ.
That's right.
Yeah. So
That's right.
yeah, they're going to dig stuff up about me.
Yeah, and so look, they didn't dig up anything on me specifically, but they dug up stuff on all sorts of other people in the movement, and they were doing it to try and divide us, to try and make other people not be willing to join us. And we have to be willing and able to look past all of that. And so I was dealing with these very real, very practical kind of aspects of why is it that civil disobedience looks wrong in real time when it's so obviously right in hindsight. So that book I explored, political incentives, the perverse incentives of politics, and the do something reflex that politicians have, where they just have to do something. It doesn't even matter if it's the right thing or if it even works. They just have to do something, and so forth. So I explored all of that. And then I got a lot of pushback from Christians saying, how dare you call yourself a Christian in public and advocate for civil disobedience? Haven't you read Romans chapter 13? Haven't you read 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13? To which I replied, yes, and I've also read the rest of the book. Have you? Because I get to Psalm 94, verse 20, which says that wicked rulers cannot be allied with you, those who use the law to cause suffering. So by definition, there is a form of wickedness that is done by the letter of the law. They can cross their T's and dot their I's, but it is wickedness in the eyes of God. Now, you mentioned before the heroes of the faith. Let's run through just a couple of really obvious ones. Daniel is probably the most obvious. Now, I love Daniel because he doesn't just give us an example of civil disobedience. He gives us an example of civil disobedience done right. He was not a rabble-rouser. He didn't run around and try and start a revolution to, blah, blah, against Darius and blah, blah, blah. It explicitly says that he went back into his chamber and he prayed as he had done before. This is so important because people said to me, listen, you can disobey the lockdowns in private. You don't have to be out there, in public, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. What? Give the appearance of putting the state government above God? Like, no. People say, oh, well, we're going to have our church meetings in secret. Okay. That's better than not having church meetings at all. But you realize you still look like you are putting the civil authorities above God. That's the appearance. And Daniel's example was to not be a rabble-rouser, to not be... He didn't say, I can't obey this law, so therefore I'm going to break all the laws. He was a decent, upstanding citizen, and he remained so, but he said, I will worship my God.
This is Caleb Collier with Church and State. Are you tired of your device spying on you? Ladies and gentlemen, we live in 1984. Your phones, your tablets, your smart televisions, they all are spying on you. And this is why I heavily endorse Mark37.com. This is everything you need for your digital privacy. Phones, tablets, laptops, all of them are ghost protocoled. So that means that you are in charge of your own data. Just go to churchandstate.media, scroll over to shop, and hit mark37.com for all of your privacy needs. Make sure to use that promo code Church and State. And we're back, and thank you for staying with us. You're over at churchandstate.media, and we're going to go right back to this great interview. But real quick, let me plug one of our awesome affiliates. And Chris, I am thinking Patriot Pouch. It's a great company. I love this guy, Alexander Duncan. He's a patriot. He's a Christian. And they have a great company that offers a nicotine alternative. And one of the really interesting things about this company is they're able to bypass some of these blue states with their just outward disdain for nicotine. And nicotine is an interesting product, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not trying to force everybody who listens to the show to start using nicotine, but there is some health benefits associated with it. Well, a lot of those blue states, they make it to where you can't get it flavored, you can't ship it into the state. It's kind of a mess. Patriot Pouch bypasses all of that. So if you are in one of these blue states, like I am, this might be an alternative for you. It hits the same nicotine receptors in your brain, but it doesn't give you the spike in your blood pressure and heart rate. It's owned by a Christian. It's owned by a Patriot. PatriotPouchUSA.com. Use that promo code Church and State when you do all of your shopping. And also, one more time, hit the donate button for us. Keep us alive. Keep conversations like this one happening. Tyranny is upon us. It truly is. And I think independent voices, people who are unafraid of what might come at them, they're important to support. So please hit the donate button for us. All right, with that, let's go ahead and go back to the interview with Topher Field. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Chris, go ahead.
Daniel's example was to not be a rabble rouser, to not be, he didn't say, I can't obey this law, so therefore I'm going to break all the laws. He was a decent, upstanding citizen, and he remained so, but he said, I will worship my God. And he did it as he had done before days. He didn't change. He didn't shut the shutters. He didn't change the time of day. He didn't lower his voice. Everything was done as it was before. The simple statement was, my God is supreme over your laws. I'm going to do what my God requires me to do. And then, when consequences followed, he accepted them with grace. And that's a really important principle that we see time and again with Christian civil disobedience. So Daniel is the prime example, in my view, of not only civil disobedience, but how it should be done. But there are so many other examples. Esther, when she's going to go before the king and ask him to save the lives of all the Jewish people, she says to her servant, go and instruct everyone in Susa to pray and to fast for 3 days, and I will do the same thing. And afterwards, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. That phrase is there in the Hebrew. Yeah. Even though it is against the law. That is premeditated law breaking. You get King David, before he was king, when he was on the run, he eats the showbread, the temple bread, because he and his men were starving. Now, not only was he not put to death, because he was supposed to be, not only was he not put to death, when Jesus was called out by the Pharisees, when his disciples had picked some meat and chewed on it,
Sabbath.
He said, on the Sabbath, that's right. So they're saying, oh, you can't be a righteous man. Your followers are doing work on the Sabbath. He pointed back to David eating the showbread as his justification for saying the Sabbath was not, man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. And so Jesus actually used David's disobedience to God's law, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay? As his theological defense of what his own disciples had just done. And we can go on. But let's move to the New Testament for a second. Paul and Peter, who respectively wrote 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 and Romans 13. So the word they use, the Greek word that they use, both of them, they use the same word. It's hupertasso. Now, what's interesting about hupertasso is that it's not the strongest form of obey. The strongest form of obey is huperkuo. Similar word, related meaning, but that's the one, if you're saying absolutely obey, you use huperkuo. Now, the funny thing is, they both use huperkuo elsewhere in their writings. They know the word. They know it exists. They choose not to use it in those passages that we quote all the time talking about obeying the government. So they have made a choice. We are not talking about absolute obedience here. We're talking about something that is below absolute obedience. Now, there's a couple of crucial things. Firstly, Peter, when he was miraculously released from prison, which he was thrown in because he was disobeying the civil authorities, by the way, he didn't then go and hand himself in at the nearest cop shop. He went right back to doing the thing that locked him up for. Yep. When Saul became Paul, he had his Damascus Road moment, and he found out that the Damascus authorities wanted to come and have a little word with him. He lowered himself over the wall in a basket at night, and he ran away. That is not deferring to civil authorities. So both of them, in how they lived, actually broke how we preach, their own theology. So there's a disconnect here, and there's two disconnects. Number one, in the Greek language, it's not an absolute obey. What it means is be orderly, be in good standing, be respectful. It's what Daniel did, right? What they are instructing is what Daniel did, not absolute obedience no matter what they tell you to do. But there's another crucial point in both of them. If you go through them, there is a purpose statement in both of them. So, for God is not a terror for the king is not a terror to good conduct, but to evil. So there's a purpose statement in there. The king is meant to be punishing evildoers and rewarding those who do good. I think it's 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, which says so the purpose of the obedience, I'd have to pull it up on the phone to quote it exactly, but the purpose of the obedience is for the sake of the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and for the sake of doing good. And For the king is the Lord's minister for the punishing of those who do evil and the rewarding of those who do good. That is a purpose statement. Now, are you a dad?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have authority over your kids.
Yeah.
But you don't have absolute authority over them.
Absolutely.
You can't sell them, for example.
Yeah.
Right? There's all sorts of things you can't do. So God says you're in charge. You have authority. If you then turn around and go, right, I can do whatever I want. You are now stepping outside of God's authority.
Exactly.
Do you have any authority outside of the authority you were given by God? No, of course not. So when God builds a purpose statement into a delegation of authority, that is a limit. He's saying, I have put the government in charge for this purpose. And if they step outside that purpose, well, that's where something like Psalm 94:20 comes in. Wicked rulers cannot be your friends. And how do we define them? They use the law to cause suffering.
Absolutely.
So,
Acts 5:29 is another verse.
Yep.
I say it a lot on my show.
Yep.
Because the disciples, the apostles, are directed by the government to say, we're going to worship Caesar. We're going to obey the laws. And their response is, we will obey the commandments of God over the commandments of man.
Yes.
And it's very specific.
It is. I apologise again. I was making sure.
No,
We've had a mix-up regarding lunch for the kids, and that's when you've got 3 young kids travelling with you. That's a bit of a drama.
Sure.
And this is the point. We must obey God rather than man. In as much as possible, live in peace with all men. That is our default position. Thing is, we have governments today that are not making it possible to live in peace with all men. They are deliberately going out of their way to make sure that you have to choose between obeying them or obeying God. In Australia, I don't have a US example specifically, but in the state of Victoria in Australia, if someone comes to you with gender confusion, there's a thing called the change suppression practices ban. And what they're trying to do is stop you from discouraging someone from getting a sex change. So if someone comes to you with gender dysphoria, and that is simply a brain that's telling them they were born in the wrong body, and there are people who genuinely have the experience of a brain that is like, no, you were born in the wrong body. Now that's a lie from the devil, sure, but they're having the experience of that. And if they come to you, you don't even have to be a pastor. If they come to you and you do anything other than affirm and encourage their progression towards surgery and hormones and everything else, then you have engaged in change suppression. That is a crime. This is not a civil offence. This isn't a case of, I'm going to sue you because you didn't accept my identity or what have you. It's the government is going to step in, prosecute you criminally, even if the person you spoke with was happy. They don't have to want you to be prosecuted in order for you to be prosecuted. The government just has to find out that you did it, and they can prosecute you, and you can go to prison for that. Now, to my knowledge, no one's been prosecuted yet. But understand, you can now be a Christian in the state of Victoria in Australia in the same rate that you can be a Christian in China. You can call yourself a Christian, you can show up to a building called a church, you can sing songs, you can read a book called the Bible, but the sermon that's preached, the prayers that are prayed, the Bible that's read, it all has to contain the government-approved theology or else. We're literally there now.
Yeah, and the United States is, especially in more of these progressive states, California has passed similar laws.
Yeah.
To where, if you do anything, in Canada it's happening right now, if you preach that homosexuality is a sin.
Yep.
If you preach from Romans 1,
yeah,
you can be thrown into prison.
Yep. And so what we've got is a situation. So I'd like to bring us back to 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel chapter 8, the passage where they come to Samuel and they say, we want a king. Mm-hmm. It's chapter 8 of one of the Samuels. I can't remember off the top of my head. So the children of Israel, they've had the system of judges. Now, this is a system that God ordained for them. God could have designed any system of government that he wanted. He had a blank slate.
And it was a representative government.
Well, what's interesting was that it was representative because the heads of families and so forth were sort of pushed up. It emerged out of their time in the wilderness when Moses was swamped and he couldn't keep up with judging all of the people.
Jethro is his father-in-law.
That's right. He actually advised it.
Yes.
And then God sort of codified it, said, yep, this has my stamp of approval. But what God gave them was enough laws that you could read it in less than 3 days. How long would it take to read all the laws in America right now?
I would never want to tackle that endeavor.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
How perverse that we have a system that says ignorance of the law is no excuse, and yet ignorance is inevitable.
Yes.
It's not possible to be anything other than ignorant when you have this many laws. Plus, you'd have to know all of the court precedents to know how they're all interpreted. Plus, you'd need to know all of the regulatory findings and everything else.
Yes.
It's impossible to not be ignorant. Now, I put it to you, that is an inherently perverse and inherently evil system of law and system of government. That's not what God designed. What God said was, here's enough laws, you can read them in about 3 days or less. And here is a system of judges to arbitrate disputes between you and when someone's accusing somebody else of having broken my laws. And notice there was no mechanism for writing more laws. So God was saying, these are all the laws you need, and these are all the laws you're ever going to need. You don't need to write more laws. You don't need the ability to do that. I'm not building that into your system. Now, of course, the children of Israel knew better. So 400 and something years later, they go to Samuel, we want a king. Now, the problem was real. The problem was perverse judges, and Samuel's two sons were perverse judges, taking bribes and engaged in all sorts of nonsense. But instead of going back to God and saying, God, we've sinned and we've ended up with unholy, unrighteous judges, because that's one of the punishments of sin, is that you get ruled by wickedness. Instead of doing that, they said, God, your system's broken. Your system's wrong. We've got a better idea. We're going to copy what all the other nations are doing. We want a king such as the other nations have. They were specifically, explicitly referencing the surrounding countries. Now, God's response when Samuel comes to him is what's crucial here. God says to Samuel, this is the same sin that their ancestors committed in the wilderness when they made golden calves and worshipped them. That's idolatry, right? Now, I grew up in Sunday school, and I used to think, you know what, God, we probably don't need all 10 commandments. There's one that seems a bit redundant these days, this whole bowing down to idols thing. Maybe they needed that 100, 200, 500 years ago. Maybe they need that in parts of Asia or something now. I don't know. But in the Western world, in this sophisticated, civilized country that we don't have idolatry. You can probably just cut it down to 9 commandments, a little bit easier to remember. I've grown up since then, of course, and I realize now idolatry would have to be one of the number one sins at a cultural level, and regrettably in a lot of our churches as well. And our idolatry today takes the exact same form as what God called out in that passage in Samuel. It is the worship of government. It's saying God will not supply all my needs. God won't protect me. Think of all the Jehovah names: Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nissi, Jehovah Tzidkenu, Jehovah Rapha, etc. Every single one of them is a promise. I will provide for you. I will meet your needs. I will defend you. You can take refuge in me. I will give you wisdom. I will give you justice. These are all promises that God gives us. What are the things we look to government for now? All of those exact same things. And more. That's exactly right. But all of those exact things that God promised us. And so what happened was the children of Israel said, God, we don't actually trust you. We think we've got a better idea. We want a king to do these things for us. He's going to go out and lead us into battle. Who did God say was going to lead them into battle? And now, what happens is God then says to the children of Israel, he says to Samuel, warn the children of Israel that this is what the king who will rule over them will do. He's going to take a tenth of your grain, a tenth of your wine, and a tenth of your oil, and he's going to take your kids to be bakers and perfumers, and they're going to be in his military and his chariots, and 10% of this and 10% of that, and you yourselves will become his slaves. Now, what's crucial here, I believe, is God is equating 10% with slavery. Now, it is a little bit of a long bow to draw. People will read the passage and be like, yeah, it's not a direct connection. Like, I see where you're going with that, but I think he meant that they'll become like actual slaves, like 100% of the time slaves. I disagree on this basis. When God said to the children of Israel, you're my people, and to prove that you're my people, you're going to give me what, complete slavery? No. What did he ask for? 10%. 10%. So if God says 10% is enough to prove that you're my people, and then he says that king's going to take 10%, you're going to be his slaves. Now, isn't it funny that today we would give anything to be down to only 10%? Oh my gosh, yes. In a heartbeat. All right? So what we've created is a monster today. Now, what God was saying, the king will take 10% of this, 10% of that. Who gives the increase? Where did that wheat come from? The oil come from? This is God's bounty. This is God who has caused the harvest. And so what God is saying, in my view, and if I can paraphrase the word of God, so obviously test this with your own spirit and don't just take my word for it. Yeah, but I would summarize this entire concept as the government, the idol that you are building with your own hands, will take from you the gifts that I've given to you, made for you with my hands. And boy, we see that today, don't we?
Well, we see that once again in more, and just diving into this a little bit more, not just government, because we now worship church leaders as well. Mm-hmm. They become an idol for us as well. It's not so much of, I believe in the living God, it's I follow Joel Osteen, or I follow Rick Warren. Yep. And most of them are feckless leaders.
Look, I'm not really across the American landscape, if I'm honest. So I'm not going to make any particular comments on any specific people, except to say that you need to be very, very careful. Was it Paul warned explicitly? This one says I am of Peter, and this one says I am of Apollos, and this one says I am of whatever. Be very careful. Be very, very careful. The one thing that Jesus told us to be proud of, to be boastful of, is that our names are written in the book of life. When the disciples came back to Jesus after Jesus had empowered them and sent them out, and he said to them, you can speak to devils and they'll obey you. You can speak to the sick and they'll be healed. They go out and it works. It happens. They come back super pumped, super excited. Jesus, do you know the thing you said? It actually happened. Jesus is like, well, yeah, no kidding. And he says, don't be excited that the devils obeyed you. Be excited that your name is written in the book of life.
Amen.
All right. And so this is the call that we have to come back to every single time. And if you're getting excited because that man's ministry is leading to healings, okay, that's fantastic, but it's not the man. Right? That man's ministry's got incredible insight and wisdom, and you've got to just follow him. He's the only one with it. Well, hold up. Now we've got a problem with Jesus' instructions to us, and we've got a problem with Paul's instructions to us. And if that person is accepting and welcoming that kind of hero worship in the context of being a pastor or a Bible teacher or anything else, then I don't think they themselves are actually practicing what Scripture teaches with regard to that kind of humility that is required. So we need to be discerning, we need to be careful. God does use individuals. He raises up people to do remarkable and great things, and we should honor that. The laborer is worthy of his hire. The man of God should be respected. Of course, I'm not advocating for anything less than respect. But we need to be very careful that our heart is focused on God and our faith is placed in Jesus Christ.
I think that's so well said, and a great way. I know we got to be cognizant of time. Excuse me. But I think it's a great way to end the interview. And I so appreciate you coming on Church and State. I want my followers to follow you.
Thank you.
So please, the website once again.
Yeah, so topherfield.com, and just go to the documentary tab. You can watch my documentary completely for free. And then at Topherfield on all my socials. I put out videos pretty regularly. I'm a mostly Australian-focused political commentator, so a lot of it's going to be kind of like, I don't know what's going on here. But I am branching out more. I'm on a 9-week speaking tour of the US, and the entire point is to begin to speak more into the US. For better or for worse, the US does lead the world in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so fighting for Australia is a bit of an uphill battle when you're downstream of another culture. So I'm trying to get myself into the American context a lot more. And I don't really want to be in the weeds of the minutiae of politics. I'll let Americans deal with what happened in the news today and all the headlines and the clickbait and all of that. I want to be getting into the real meat of things, the principles of what actually changes history. And that, of course, is number one is God, Jesus Christ himself. But number two, it's then how that then flows into our culture, into our attitudes, into our economics, into things like civil disobedience and how we respond when government does overstep its boundaries. That's the level at which I'm playing and speaking, and I'm really grateful to you for sharing your platform with me to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. And honestly, like with the emphasis on Australia, it was bad in the United States, but it was much worse in Australia. It was the canary in the coal mine. Mm-hmm. And I guess the last question I have for you here is, personally, I don't think they're done. I think they saw the tyranny they were able to enact through this pandemic. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to come back with another.
So I think it's going to be done a little differently. I know in Australia, if they were to turn around now and try and do another harsh lockdown, Australians are done. We're not playing that game. I think what they're trying to accomplish is an effective lockdown through cost of living. So you will diminish your life, not because they told you couldn't leave your house, but because you ran the numbers and said, I can't afford to drive to XYZ.
There you go. And that enters into the 15-minute city.
Correct. And so it won't necessarily be hard-bordered. I think they've realized that game's kind of up. People have kind of woken up to that. And so if they can just keep driving the cost of living out of control, people will diminish their own lives. And they won't actually have to bring in rules necessarily in order to accomplish what they want.
That makes sense. And if it costs, if gas is $20 a gallon or something, maybe you're not going to grandma's at the next town.
Yeah, correct. And then if they do decide to actually enact it and to enforce it and put in cameras and limits and so forth, they can then portray it as leveling the playing field. Well, this doesn't affect you because you're too poor to drive that far anyway. It's just those rich people that aren't doing the right thing like what you are.
There it is.
Correct. We're just leveling the playing field so that the fact that they've got money doesn't mean that they have an unfair advantage and they get to live in a way that you can't. Yeah, that I think is how the next sort of play is going to come at us, and I think it has already started in a very real sense. But we also have to remember that God is sovereign, and He wins in the end. And I don't say that with a fatalism. Some people say that with a fatalism of, let's just not bother because Jesus wins in the end. We are called, and our calling stands regardless of what you think about end times theology, regardless of how long you think it's going to be before something or other happens, we have a great commission, and we are instructed to raise godly children and to raise up generations to make disciples of all men. Those truths, that commission applies no matter what. And so can I encourage you, don't get too caught up in the minutiae. Don't black pill yourself with despair, thinking that everything's going to be terrible and bad, and the mysterious they have already won. They already knew what was going to happen. One last thing. One of the things that annoys me, and it annoys me especially now, because as I'm beginning to get some traction in my work, there are people who used to support my work, and now they're turning because they say, oh, they wouldn't have let him get so big unless he'd sold out. Yeah. And so this attitude of the they and this belief that they have everything under control means that nothing good can ever happen to you. Right? Because the minute something good happens in your movement, someone gets some breakthrough, someone gets some traction, you ostracize them out of your movement. You condemn them as the enemy, irrespective of whether it's true or not. You've just got this preconceived notion that nothing good will ever happen. And therefore, if it does, we have to ostracize that person because there must be something bad about what they've done. God is good. God wins in the end. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be losing all the way up until that happens. We have a call. We have a God who is mighty. And if the Lord builds the house, they labor. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. So if you're not working with God, you're wasting the time. But also, if God be for us, none can stand against us. And from the bigger picture, from the eternal picture, from God's perspective, He is a giver of good gifts. And not every gift not every gift that looks good from eternity looks good within the time.
Yes.
What was the name of the author of Amazing Grace? You guys will be screaming.
I know the name, and I'm forgetting it, but the story is absolutely incredible.
Correct. So his story was his mother taught him about God until he was just about to have his 7th birthday. Then she died, I believe, of tuberculosis. Then he ended up in basically a godless home and ended up moving into the Navy at 11, as a sailor at 11. Ended up working on a slave ship, became a particularly brutal, merciless slave trader, to the point that he was abandoned, I believe in Africa somewhere, and they tried to sell him into slavery in Africa, and he managed to get out of that, and he got on somebody else's ship. He was sailing home, and they were nearly shipwrecked, and he cried out to God in that moment. He remembered what his mum taught him, and he cried out to God in that moment, and he went on to write the hymn Amazing Grace. Now imagine an angel visits his mum when she's pregnant, says, I have some amazing news for you. Your son is going to be an incredibly famous hymn writer. And for hundreds of years after his death, people will sing his hymn in moments of crisis, from the depths of despair, when they're locked up in a prison, when they're lost in a jungle. They will find hope in that hymn, and thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people will be saved over hundreds of years because of the hymn that your son writes. Would you like that to be the story of your son? Yes. Here I am, your faithful servant, of course. Okay. The fine print. The fine print is, in order to make that happen, in order for him to reach a depth of despair so deep that he will write a hymn that powerful, he has to become a man so unimaginably evil. And that means I can't let you be his mum, because you're bringing him up too well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to take you home early so that your son falls into despair and sin and crime and becomes one of the most despicable human beings imaginable, responsible for the deaths of innocent people. And then I'm going to nearly kill him, and then all that good stuff will happen, but you won't be around to see any.
Yeah.
Now, does that make God a bad God? Was that a bad gift? From a human perspective, and I'll guarantee you, her husband, when she's dying, and their child is not even 7 years old, her husband is praying, saying, God, why are you doing this to me? How could you cause me to suffer like this? Why? And God's in heaven going, mate, I wish you could see it from my point of view. That was a good gift. So guys, whatever you're going through, God is good. He's got good gifts for you. Trust His eternal perspective.
That's an incredible word of encouragement. I really appreciate you sharing that with the audience. Thank you, Topher. Really appreciate it.
All right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Topher Field, an amazing Australian patriot. I think this episode serves as a warning, really throughout the world, because as I've said on the show multiple times, I do believe that they'll do another pandemic on us. They were able to achieve far too much tyranny to not come at us again with something similar. And it's really going to be up to us. It's going to be up to us, people who are patriots, who love freedom, on whether or not we're going to submit to another lockdown like this. I, for one, I never will. Obviously, Topher, my guest, won't either. Church and State is brought to you in part by Colonial Life Spokane Independent Agents, Finders Insurance, and Mark37.com. I'm Caleb Collier. I was born for a storm.
Welcome to the fire.
Hey, this is Caleb Collier with the Church and State Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I want all of you to go to Galileo.com. You need to stay connected no matter what comes our way. Whether it's government intrusion or a meteor falling from the sky, Galileo has you connected. As a Marine veteran, I can tell you that communications is essential. Galileo has you connected. Whether it's worldwide coverage, uncensored content, or real-time alerts, Galileo is going to make sure that you're connected with your friends, family, and neighbors. Just head on over to churchandstate.media, scroll over to shop, and hit Galileo.com. Make sure to ask them for a free bivvy stick, and make sure to use that promo code Church and State. Hey, this is Caleb Collier with Church and State, and I want to tell you about a great product, Liberty Cigars. I know for myself, there's nothing grander than sitting around a campfire, having a great theology discussion with a group of men while smoking a cigar. That's why I love Liberty Cigars. Every cigar has a story to tell. Not only are you going to be smoking the finest cigars on the market, but you're also going to get a history lesson with every single one of them. From George Washington to Thomas Jefferson, the heroes of the American Revolution, generals, presidents throughout history. I'm telling you, I absolutely love Liberty Cigars. I need you to go to libertycigars.com. Use that promo code Church and State. You'll get a discount, and you'll also be helping to support Church and State with everything that we do. Hey, this is Caleb Collier, and I know you're excited for the Church and State podcast. Now, as a Christian patriot, I love precious metals, whether it's gold, silver, palladium, and of course, lead. And this is why I want you to go over to Ponderay Ballistics, don't ask me how to spell it, for all of your ammunition needs. Remember, that's Pendoreille ballistics.com for all of your ammunition needs. I want you to head on over to churchandstate.media/shop, go to Ponderay Ballistics, and have a shooting good time.